Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer.
Amen.
Words from Psalm 19, which is the psalm set for today. Today, in our service of Holy Communion, we celebrate the third Sunday of Lent. We're not exactly halfway through Lent, but we're well into that season of our year. And I'm wondering what Lent means to us and how it is going for us. When talking to people about prayer, one of the things that is sometimes said is, pray as you can, not as you can't. Pray as you are, not as you aren't. In other words, pray the way that is appropriate for your personality and circumstances. I suggest that it's the same for Lent. Live Lent as you can, not as you can't. Live Lent as you are, not as you aren't. In my youth, in Lent, there was a strong emphasis on self-denial. If it wasn't hard, it wasn't good. And sadly, sometimes my mother also had that attitude. This sense of giving up, say, giving up drinking alcohol or coffee, smoking, biscuits, chocolate, buying new clothes, and having a day of fasting or a meat-free day. Now, while I don't in any way say that there's anything wrong with that, I am thankful that nowadays there is also the idea of taking up, the idea of doing something extra, perhaps reading a Lent book, attending a course or a discussion group, contemplating nature more quietly and reflectively, thinking about painting, music, and the arts. Whatever way we choose, there are no oughts, shoulds, or musts. I am one of those people that tends to start very enthusiastically and then flags a little in the middle. And so I need something to sort of buoy me up again. And if I were to ask each of you as individuals how Lent is going for you, I would probably get a variety of answers. Some would be very positive, some would be less so. And we need constantly, not just during Lent, we constantly need encouragement. We need hope, and particularly in these very uncertain times. And in that respect, today's Bible passages for me are a particularly relevant and wonderful gift. In our reading from Exodus, God speaks the 10 Commandments to the people. We assume then that he expected the people to listen. The commandments were given to the people of Israel, who in that sense were very early in their relationship with God. They had wandered, not just literally, but metaphorically. They'd wandered in the desert. They had been disobedient. And now God gives them these commandments, which are still relevant for us in the 21st century. They are about keeping God at the center. Our psalm for today, Psalm 19, which we hadn't read, but which is included in your order of service, is for me a really wonderful psalm, telling of God's creation and the wonder of creation, praising God. It also reminds us of the glory and the majesty of God. But in that psalm, there is also the words, cleanse me from secret faults. And that theme of cleansing is echoed in our gospel reading for today. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Those of you who are familiar with the Haydn creation will be reminded, well, as I am, of that wonderful chorus, reminding us that we are part of creation and not to exploit creation. And if we're wanting creation to worship God, as is said in this psalm, then we really need to be working in harmony with nature. A very important message for us today. The final words of that psalm are, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer." Reminding us of God being the strength, God being the Redeemer. In our promises at ordination, we say, with God's help, we will. And it's a we, not an I, although this psalm, it's I. I also like the word acceptable there. It's not saying, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be perfect. It's saying be acceptable, a very welcoming word. Moving on to the Corinthians reading, as already mentioned in the passage, the theme of wisdom of God as opposed to the foolishness of the world echoes the wisdom in the psalm, as does this theme of the strength of God against the weakness of the values of the word. For God's foolishness is wiser than human's wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. Our gospel reading dramatically describes Jesus cleansing the temple, again picking up the word cleanse from Psalm 19. There's absolutely nothing mealy-mouthed about Jesus' anger at the people's having abused the temple, but he's also speaking about himself as the temple, not being understood by the people at the time, which is a feature of parts of John's Gospel. And reminding us, I think, also that we are called to be temples. Again, in this Bible Gospel reading, there's the contrast between the values of God's way and the values of the Word's way. So we have, from our readings today, we have the law in the commandments spoken by God, the praise and the wonder of creation and the majesty of God's nature, God's wisdom and strength in contrast with the foolishness and weakness of the word's value, and our need for cleansing, letting go of what may be drawing us away from God rather than towards God, holding on to the encouragement and hope of God as our strength and our Redeemer. So, changing those words slightly, let the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. And may God add his blessing to these words.